Greetings from Nairobi, Kenya and around the world. I am Derrick Reece and welcome to News Dots. We're bringing exclusive details of happenings from all over on issues affecting public interests in health, economy, education and finally arts and culture. But first, a glance at trending stories from around the world. Samuel Little has confessed to 90 murders and is being investigated as possibly the most prolific serial killer in US history. Records trace his criminality to 1956 for fraud and shoplifting. The 78-year-old confessed to prey mainly on drug addicts and prostitutes during a decades-long murder spree. FBI says Little is in poor health and is likely to spend the remainder of his days in prison in Texas. Virali Modi shared a horrible security while traveling through Mumbai Chhatrapati Airport. The woman uses a wheelchair and was made to stand up for security check by the staff at the airport. Modi said on Twitter that the staff forcibly lifted her legs, which caused her legs to cramp. The Minister of State for Civil Aviation, Jayant Sinha, replied to Modi's post apologizing for the treatment she received. A Class 8 student in Shamshabad was brutally thrashed by his teacher for not being attentive in class on a Saturday. D. Barath was caught laughing by his teacher Hanumantha Rao and caned him, leaving his arm and back badly bruised. Barath's father alleges the principal covering up for the teacher despite his promise of taking action. Parents are demanding the teacher's immediate suspension. Among the three top global stories making headlines, we'll be delving into one major global story on corporal punishment in our schools today here in Kenya. Now, the Kenyan Constitution emphasizes that every child has a right to be protected from abuse, neglect, and harmful practices. In a Gazette notice dated March 13, 2001, the then Minister for Education, Kalonzo Musyoka, scrapped the sections of the law that permitted corporal punishment. The notice was intended to clarify any doubt about the nature of punishment to be meted out on delinquent students. According to a study done by Joan Gishuru of University of Nairobi in 2005, a section of teachers argue that despite the fact that corporal punishment is offensive and violent, there are cases where caning is the ultimate solution to indiscipline. Current Cabinet Secretary for Education Amina Mohammed says the law on corporal punishment in schools is very clear, so the government will not and has no intention to contravene it. This, she said, after a section of MPs demanded the introduction of this type of disciplinary action, saying it will restore order in high schools. According to academic behind research, instead of those established corporal punishment to change students' behavior, it creates resentment and damages the relation between a student and a teacher. Well, what do you think? The Twitter handle is at news_dots and D_Reece. We shall sample some of your feedback during the feature. Let's see what you're saying on Twitter. At Wangare100 says, I will definitely sue for physical abuse should my child be roughed up to the level of bruises. Caning was banned, period. The emotion. Well, before we expound into this, George Mule, one of our correspondents, is joining us live and will give us an in-depth say into this issue.
Unfortunately, some schools still use corporal punishment as a form of instilling discipline in young children. Some schools still use corporal punishment to ensure discipline. Now, cases reported are from public schools majorly than private schools. Is it because most public schools are kind of socialist, hence fail to follow required protocol? There are reported cases on private institutions as well. The case of the Nyeri girl is still fresh in some of our minds, who was beaten till she collapsed and declared dead after reaching hospital. Even with the stringent ban placed in 2001, some teachers still advocate for the use of the cane. Truancy seems only to be conquered through corporal punishment, it seems. Culprits are covered up by the school administration. Is there justice for our children who are hurting today? Stay with us for this piece.
Right, thank you, George. In your own opinion, should we reintroduce corporal punishment in the Kenyan education system or not?
Thank you, Reece, for that question. I think that insanity is doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting different results. I think that corporal punishment is something that is a bit extreme in some cases, because in schools, even when you see cases of indiscipline, even in the news, the trend is usually the same. They'll ask all the religious leaders, they'll ask all the child psychologists, they will ask all the teachers, they'll ask all the politicians. But one party they leave out of all this inquiring and investigating is the main character, the main issue, which is the child. I've never seen in interviews, I've never seen even the government themselves actually asking a student or asking the young demographic, okay, what is the matter? clearly there is a problem, because even we've been taught basic psychology. You don't even have to read it, that when a child reacts, when a child is consistently and constantly indisciplined or expresses himself in a manner that is maladaptive, usually it's a psychological problem. But our teachers and the environment around that child, they are not equipped enough to understand the child. So I think that they should address the problem instead of attacking it. Yes.
I see this is creating a buzz on social media. More tweets coming your way. At Alois_Lavan says, I think regulation is the word, because we can't deny the teens and children today are becoming rampant. So yes, introduce it back, but punish those who cause abuse. Interesting point of view. Keep the tweets coming, only here at News Dots. Thank you for watching News Dots. Time for our feature today, and joining us is Dr. Caroline Ayuya, a psychologist, Matthew Lenge of Jericho High School principal, and Awa Muhindi, a lawyer at Ogola and Mujera Law Advocates. Thank you all for making time for the News Dots. I'll start off with you, Awa. Corporal punishment was banned as it contradicts the rights of a Kenyan child. What are some of the legal measures one could face should they be found overruling this ban?
Well, both the Basic Education Act and the Children's Act provide for penalties. Now, if you're asking about specifically corporal punishment in schools, then the Basic Education Act provides that you can be subjected to a fine of up to 100,000 shillings, and that penalty is still there. So, if a child or if a complaint is made to the police, then that penalty can be followed through. However, again, the system provides that you'd have to now reach a conviction. Convictions require you to have proceeded through complaints, police procedures, and then moving from there, you now have to follow the case through in court. That is not always a process that people are intent on following or will follow on a day-to-day basis, and people often find they have other things they need to deal with before they're going to subject themselves to that kind of procedure. So as much as the penalties are there in law, it's not necessarily going to mean that every act of corporal punishment being done in school is going to result in a criminal conviction for those reasons.
Should it be reintroduced? What happens to the cases in court for the abused children and alleged culprits?
I would struggle to see scenarios in which we'd have corporal punishment to be reintroduced. If the society has moved to a stage where we define children being beaten in schools by teachers with sticks as punishment or abuse or physical torture or anything else that comes within the definitions of the crime of the offense in the Basic Education Act or the Children's Act, then moving back from that would be a bit difficult, because if that act has occurred, unless somebody goes now or an act of parliament is taken to repeal or to redefine what chastisement of children in schools would be to a level that is acceptable. Because if the act has said that physical abuse or physical torture of children is an offense, and society sees it as such, it would be a bit difficult to roll back from that. As for cases in court, again, if it was a crime when the offense was committed, then it was a crime. I guess for future events, you would be able to say that it's now no longer a crime, and that doesn't happen, but you'd finish cases that were in court.
Would you recommend any other solution that complies with the Children's Act?
Yeah, I think a lot of the problems plaguing the behavioral problems that students are experiencing are not, it's not a legal problem per se. It's not something that will be solved by banning and creating punishments for either teachers or students. It's a social issue. It's an upbringing issue. If your teachers are not financially motivated to turn up to school, if the teachers are turning up drunk, if parents are not finding time to spend time with their children because they're busy hustling from one job to another, that's where indiscipline comes from. It comes from people not having the time to raise their children, or teachers not being able to give their their wards the attention they need, or suffering from their own issues, and they can't be coming to raise other people's children. That's where the problem lies. Yeah, at least in my humble view, it's not. The law provides that physical abuse and torture of children is an offense, and currently now we see that corporal punishment falls within that category. I don't, and I hope that we'll never see the rolling back of those kind of views, and that we focus more on fixing the social issues that are leading to indiscipline, rather than trying to create new punishments or finding other ways of punishing children.
On to you, Mr. Linge. What do you think makes corporal punishment the alternative to solve indiscipline in schools today?
Yeah, in view of what is going on in our schools, there is need for us to look for alternative forms of punishment, because corporal punishment, though people may think that it's effective, sometimes it doesn't work, because sometimes some of the students, especially those who are hardcore, they get used to these forms of punishment where even if you inflict pain on them, they will still see no, they will not have much. They'll only be fearing the cane, but they will not have a discipline within themselves. But if we can have alternative forms of discipline, like sharing with them and showing them why they need to be useful members of the society, why they need to conduct themselves well, why they need to fit well in the society, I believe that would be a better form of instilling discipline in the students, other than using corporal punishment.
What about applying detention or extra work? Don't you think that could work? If yes, why?
I believe that would work in the Kenyan system, because as we look for alternative forms of disciplining students, then to me those would be some of the forms of discipline those are some of the alternatives that we can use to make students become responsible. Like talk of detention for students. If you talk of say if it's time for going for half term, and then possibly you bring in that aspect of, if some students have been involved in this kind of indiscipline or the other, they will be detained in school for 1 or 2 days. I believe that one would be effective, because I know students value their half term so much. So I'm sure they would make sure they don't do anything that would make them to be detained. Also, other forms of punishment which can also be effective. Sometimes the parents can be advised to hold on some of the things or some of the privileges that they give to students. I believe those would be some of the alternative forms of ways of instilling discipline, other than using corporal punishment.
Dr. Ayuya, from a clinical perspective, being truant is stoned by using of caning, even stated in the Bible. But does this affect the personality of a child, especially in primary school?
Really, it depends. First of all, children don't have a personality per se, but they have a traits that accumulate to their personality. So basically, yes, using a cane can affect the way they perceive in terms of discipline, and therefore, depending on the child, on how they perceive, it can affect them either positively or negatively, and depending on the intensity of the punishment.
Would you say then that corporal punishment shapes up the child?
Not necessarily. We prefer probably reinforcement, and punishment is only good if it is age limited, and then depends on the intensity, and depends on the kind of the punishment, and also depends on what the mistake is all about. For example, if it's a light mistake and you give a huge punishment that is unnecessary, basically that's going to affect the child. And of course, depends on whether you explained the mistake or not. And so all those factors definitely are going to affect the child in terms of corporal. So corporal punishment, not necessarily the best.
Much gratitude to Dr. Caroline Ayuya, Matthew Linge, and Awa Muhindi for their opinions on our feature today. Let's have a look at some of your feedback on Twitter. @concerned_citizen says, I would never advocate for corporal punishment. If we must be Western, detention or extra work is the way to go. Caning creates a disturbed child. With this never-ending issue of corporal punishment in schools, we just might see caning reintroduced back to the learning systems. Teenagers, especially these days, have become truant, and that's a fact. The current state of unrest has been all over, and introducing corporal punishment might just be the solution. There are limits, seeing as Kenya is also a signatory to the Convention on Rights of the Child, cited by the United Nations in 1990 states. Discipline involving violence is unacceptable. Our children being abused by the teachers with evidence seen circulating on social media, some cases even resulting to death. Teachers may argue that caning is the ultimate solution to indiscipline, but how far is too far? The children of Kenya have rights, and our Muhindi has distinctively outlined the penalties on acting for the use of corporal punishment. Thank you for watching wherever you are. Remember to keep the conversation going. On Twitter, the handle is @news_dots and @d_reece, as seen below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. For more, only here on News Dots. Au revoir.